My own daughter betrayed me. I was kicked out of the house my husband built, the last symbol of our love. She sold it all behind my back just to pay for her wedding. I felt utterly humiliated, but she didn't know about the secret buried in the basement. What the new owner called to tell me, that shut everyone up, and the price of her greed. It cost her own inheritance. Before we continue, please like this video and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far our reports reach. Thank you. I just finished saying what needed to be said in my outburst, but the truth is, the shock hit me before the tears did. I, Vivian, at 58 years old, was staring at my daughter, Serena, 26, trying to process the chilling words she'd just uttered. It was an email from the real estate company, which I'd initially dismissed as spam, confirming the house sale would close in 10 days. "We needed the money, Mom. The wedding is expensive," she mumbled, as if her diamond ring was worth more than the memory of Leonard, my late husband. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar. Every plank, every beam, was laid by Leonard with his own hands. It was the love nest he promised would be ours forever. I watched him pour the foundation, nail the frame, paint the walls a soft cream color. He built it for us. Seeing that house go felt like watching a part of him die all over again. I felt utterly betrayed and literally expelled from my own life. The country house, the last refuge we shared, was disappearing, and with it, the last physical piece of him. The pain of my widowhood doubled, twisting my stomach into a knot of sheer emotional nausea. The first night in a cheap motel room was hell. The floral wallpaper and thin sheets felt like a deliberate insult to the beautiful life Leonard had given me. I kept reaching for the phone to call him, to ask him how we could fix this mess, before remembering that the silence on the other end would be eternal. The realization that my own flesh and blood, the child Leonard adored, had done this to me made the grief unbearable. I called Serena, but she wouldn't even pick up. I was alone, and the weight of her greed was overwhelming. I lay awake, tracing the cracks in the motel ceiling, haunted by the memory of Serena as a little girl, running through the house, her laughter echoing in the wide-open living room Leonard designed. How could that innocent girl turn into this calculating woman? I tried to find an excuse for her. Maybe she was truly desperate. But no, the photos she posted on social media, the designer gowns, the extravagant venue walkthroughs. It was all about luxury, not necessity. The house was paid off. It was my safety net. Leonard ensured that. But Serena, my darling daughter, saw it as a massive liquid asset. A quick fix. She manipulated me for months, suggesting I should downsize, telling me the house was too big for one woman. I was blind, too trusting, too consumed by my grief to see the trap. I finally managed to reach her fiancé, a nice boy named Marcus, who sounded uncomfortable. He admitted he knew about the sale but thought I had agreed to it. The lie was deeper than I thought. Serena had spun a narrative of a supportive mother willingly giving up the asset for her daughter's dream wedding. I felt a fresh wave of shame. She hadn't just sold the house. She'd sold my reputation to her future in-laws. I spent the remaining days before the closing packing essentials, unable to even look at the larger items of furniture. They belonged to a life that no longer existed. I kept repeating one phrase in my mind. How could she? It wasn't a question. It was a curse. The finality of the situation, the signing of the papers, the keys being handed over, the removal of the mailbox Leonard hammered into the post himself, felt like a forced eviction from my own heart. I left before the final walkthrough, unable to bear the sight of strangers measuring my memories. I was nothing but a casualty in my daughter's pursuit of a lavish wedding, a forgotten widow crying alone in a dingy room. I just wanted to go home, but that home was gone. The only thing I had left was the fierce, cold desire for justice. Moving into that tiny rented apartment was a quiet humiliation. The few boxes I allowed myself to keep seemed to mock the grand life I once had. Everything felt flimsy, temporary, the opposite of the solid, permanent structure Leonard had built for me. I deliberately refused to take any large pieces of furniture. Why? Because every mahogany curve, every velvet thread, reminded me of Leonard and the crushing lie my daughter had perpetuated. I couldn't stomach sleeping in the same bed Serena had, in effect, sold out from under me. Finally, Serena showed up at the new apartment, but she wasn't there to apologize. She came to defend her action, dressed in expensive designer clothes for a bridal fitting. She stood in the middle of my cramped living room, which could barely fit 2 people comfortably, and lectured me. "You were just hoarding the house, Mom. It was a waste of space. We are meant to be a family, and I needed to start mine." "You didn't need all that space," she screamed, flipping the blame back onto me. Her voice was high-pitched, defensive, and completely devoid of empathy. The fight that erupted was violent, not with fists, but with words that left bruises on my soul. I called her selfish and a traitor. I reminded her that her father had poured his life into that house, and she'd treated it like a commodity, a bonus check. She countered by accusing me of being emotionally manipulative, of clinging to the past, and of not letting her grow up. "I need to move on, Mom. You need to move on," she shrieked, tears of frustration, not regret, streaming down her face. I looked at her then, truly looked at the stranger standing in my doorway, and I knew I had lost both the house and the daughter. I didn't recognize the person who prioritized status over her own mother's comfort and security. That moment sealed it for me. My grief for Leonard was now compounded by the grief for the daughter I thought I raised. I watched her storm out, the slam of the cheap metal door echoing the finality of our rift. Later that night, I was sitting on the floor of my new, cold bedroom, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke from the previous tenant. I felt utterly defeated. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered to the ghost of my husband, "Leonard, I will go back to that house one day. I promise you. I don't know how, but I will." It was a vow of a broken woman. And then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, an area code from a different state. I hesitated. I had zero desire to talk to anyone, especially not another one of Serena's associates trying to sell me something. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some flicker of curiosity, some primal instinct, made me slide the green button. The voice was a man's, gentle, but hesitant. "Mrs. Vivian? I'm so sorry to call, but my name is Adrienne. I'm the one who bought the house." My stomach immediately knotted. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of the buyer calling me directly. I braced myself for an argument, for a request for a forgotten key or a piece of mail. But what he said next made me freeze, every nerve ending in my body suddenly alert. I was doing some renovations in the basement, and, well, I think I found something you might want to see. A secret. Leonard's secret. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. This was it. The twist. The universe, or perhaps Leonard, had answered my vow. "Mr. Adrian," I managed, my voice a dry whisper that felt alien in my throat. I don't own that house anymore. I'm not responsible for anything found there." I tried to sound detached, professional, but my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I know, Mrs. Vivian. And I wouldn't call you for something minor. This isn't a forgotten box of holiday decorations," Adrian explained, his tone respectful, almost apologetic. "I was working in the utility area of the basement, near where Leonard used to keep his workbench. You know, his corner? I knew that corner. Leonard spent countless hours down there, tinkering, fixing, dreaming. It was his sanctuary, the only place in the house where he allowed himself to get truly messy. I was planning to put in some new shelving, so I decided to pull up that old, heavy metal cabinet," Adrian continued. Underneath it, the concrete floor looked odd. It was a patch about 3 feet by 3 feet that had been patched up, but not very well. It looked different from the rest of the floor, slightly newer, almost deliberately disguised. I gripped the cheap plastic phone, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Leonard's internal joke echoed in my memory. "Our best secrets are beneath our feet, Vivian." Adrian said he tried scraping at it, thinking it was just a poor repair job. But something felt wrong. He decided to use a small power tool to break up the patch. It took him a while, but he managed to lift the layer of newer cement. And I pushed, unable to wait for the narrative pace to catch up with my racing mind. "And I found a metal box," he confirmed. "It's a large, heavy safe box, the kind you'd keep important documents in, maybe a foot deep and 2 feet long. It was wrapped in a heavy stained tarp, and it was deliberately buried in the ground Leonard built." I stopped working immediately. Something told me this wasn't just old junk. It seemed like someone had sealed it away with great care and urgency. His decency hit me with a force that far surpassed Serena's betrayal. Here was a complete stranger who had bought my daughter's greed for cash, yet he had the moral compass to pause his renovation and track me down, the exiled widow, simply because he thought the contents might have sentimental value. I haven't opened it, Mrs. Vivian. I felt it was too personal, too much like crossing a line. I figured it had to belong to you or your late husband, Adrian concluded. He then asked the crucial question. Did Leonard have a habit of hiding things? Did he ever talk about burying anything? I told him about the joke, about Leonard's love for secrecy and his flair for the dramatic when it came to gifts. I heard the hesitation in Adrian's voice and sensed he was nervous about the implications. After a brief pause, he insisted, Look, I can't in good conscience keep going until you see this. I don't want to be involved in anything legal. Could you possibly come back? Just to look at it? I'll be here all evening. My heart soared. This was my path back inside the house, my chance to connect with Leonard one last time. It was a sliver of hope, a moment of profound mystery that was far more potent than the despair I had been drowning in. I felt an immediate surge of energy, a fierce determination replacing my former apathy. I grabbed my keys, thanked Adrian profusely, and told him I'd be there in an hour. The secret was finally being unearthed, and I knew deep down that this box was Leonard's final, perfect plan. The drive back to the house felt surreal. Every turn, every familiar oak tree lining the road, was a knife twist of memory. Seeing the house again, with Adrian's moving van parked in the driveway and the front door open, felt like walking onto an emotional crime scene. The familiar scent of aged wood and lavender was gone. Replaced by the sterile smell of new paint and drywall, it felt like a profanation of Leonard's love. Adrian, a kind-faced man in his early 30s, met me at the door. He was exactly as he sounded on the phone, respectful and clearly uncomfortable about being caught in the middle of a family drama he didn't understand. He led me straight down to the basement, his footsteps echoing in the quiet, newly exposed space. The sight of Leonard's corner made my throat clench. The tools were gone, the workbench had been moved, and in the middle of the floor, where the old cabinet used to stand, was the exposed, broken concrete. And there it was, the heavy dark metal box, still slightly gritty from the surrounding dirt, wrapped in the filthy, torn canvas tarp Adrian had described. Adrian immediately backed away, giving me space. It's yours, Mrs. Vivian. Please take your time. I knelt down, the cold concrete seeping through my thin pants. My hands trembled as I reached out and touched the cold, unforgiving metal. It felt solid, real, a tangible message from the man I thought I'd lost forever. I fumbled with the rusted latches, finally managing to snap them open. The scent that wafted out was a mixture of old paper, cedar, and that distinct, comforting smell of Leonard's garage, a smell that made me cry silently, the tears falling onto the lid of the box. The top layer was a true treasure trove, a stack of our old dating photos, slightly yellowed, giggling on a roller coaster. The first love notes we ever exchanged, written on napkins. A leather-bound journal Leonard kept during the entire construction of the house, detailing every single day's work and how much he loved the woman he was building it for. And then I saw it, the old, reliable wristwatch he wore every day, the one he hadn't been wearing when he passed. He'd put it in here. But under all the beautiful sentimentality, at the very bottom, beneath a thin layer of packing peanuts, was the strange centerpiece, a common, unassuming USB flash drive and a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. Written on the envelope, in Leonard's distinctive, elegant handwriting, was a chilling, absolute phrase, "For Vivian only, never sell this house." The message tore through my soul. He knew. He had predicted it. He foresaw the possibility of Serena's betrayal, or at least her future financial desperation that might lead to this awful moment. I could barely process the simultaneous, agonizing pain of Serena's actions and the profound, overwhelming relief of this secret being found. I looked at Adrian, who was still standing discreetly near the door. "Thank you, Adrian," I whispered, my voice raw with emotion. "Thank you for your honesty. You have no idea what this means." I carefully secured the box and all its contents. The pen drive and the envelope were what mattered now. The house was the frame, The memories were the paint, but this was the heart. I felt a surge of adrenaline, replacing my despair with fierce, cold hope. Leonard's final instruction was clear. The last vestige of his life had triggered a message of both heartache and, I suspected, perfect justice. I couldn't wait to get back to my miserable apartment, to the cold reality, to unlock Leonard's final secret. I drove back to my small, temporary apartment, the metal box secured on the passenger seat like a priceless artifact. I was shaking, less from the cold and more from the profound sense of destiny. I finally had a moment of quiet, a rare peace to confront the secret. I set the box on my small dining table, staring at the pen drive and the sealed envelope, the only two things that truly mattered now. I felt the presence of my late husband, Leonard, in the room. His memory didn't just give me strength, it gave me purpose. I slid the USB drive into my laptop, my fingers hovering over the file. It was a single video file, simply titled, V Final Instructions. I pressed play. There he was. Leonard. He was sitting right there in the basement, in the exact spot where Adrian had found the box. His hands were smudged with dried cement, a familiar sight. His eyes were moist, reflecting the lamplight above him, but his voice, though slightly husky, was firm. The video had clearly been recorded shortly before his illness had worsened dramatically, months before he passed away. He didn't waste any time. "Hello, my Vivian," he started, a tender smile momentarily masking the sadness in his eyes. "If you are watching this video, it means one thing: the house is gone. You are in pain, and for that, I am profoundly sorry." He then began to explain. He said the reason he built the house, every single piece of it, was not just to give us a home, but to create a protection. He confessed that he'd become gravely concerned about my financial vulnerability after his passing. He knew the house was beautiful and valuable, but he also recognized that in a world of greed and financial pressure, especially from someone close, it could easily become a target. Then the shocking part. He paused, swallowed hard, and his eyes filled with genuine tears. He cried as he said he was terrified that our daughter, Serena, would fall into the trap of immediate financial gain and sell the house, betraying not only my trust but his memory. "I built this house for you to live in, Vivian, but it also became a test. A test of loyalty for our child," he admitted. "If she or anyone ever convinced you to sell it, if she took the easy money, it meant the ultimate emotional and financial security I planned for you was at risk." He looked directly into the camera, and it felt as though he was right there in the room, his eyes holding mine. "If you are seeing this, darling," Leonard said, his voice stronger now, "it means the house was sold, and your pain is real. But the house was just the bait. The true home, the true financial protection, the fortress I built for you against the world, is here in this envelope." My breath hitched. I slumped back in my chair, the strength draining from my body. Leonard hadn't just predicted the betrayal, he had constructed a safeguard against it. He turned the ultimate act of greed into the trigger for his ultimate act of love and justice. He wasn't punishing Serena, he was ensuring her greed would not destroy me. The house was the key to my future, a key Serena had carelessly turned to lock herself out. The envelope. It was the key. My hands, though still shaking, were now trembling with anticipation, not grief. I gingerly broke the wax seal, an intricate design Leonard had commissioned years ago. A stylized oak tree intertwined with an anchor, symbolizing strength and steadfastness. Inside, it wasn't a property deed or cash, but a legal document, an irrevocable trust agreement, fully authenticated, notarized, and registered months before his death. I devoured the pages, my eyes blurring as the legalese transformed into pure, beautiful revelation. Leonard, with breathtaking genius and foresight, had secretly transferred all his liquid assets into this trust. This included his entire portfolio of stock market investments, several high-yield financial funds, and, most critically, the deed and ownership of a highly desirable commercial rental complex in the heart of the city. The one he'd always claimed was a low-income, high-hassle investment. It was, in fact, an absolute cash cow. And the name of the sole beneficiary? Vivian. Then I found the most crucial clause, the one that sent a powerful shiver of satisfaction and absolute justice through me. The trust would only be fully activated and paid out in its entirety to the beneficiary, me, upon the documented sale of the house built by him in the country. My mind raced, connecting the pieces. The country house, the emotional symbol, was a low-income, high-tax asset in terms of liquid wealth. The commercial complex and the funds were a fortune, worth several millions. Leonard used the house as an emotional and financial deterrent. He established the house as the main family asset everyone, especially Serena, focused on, knowing that the pressure of her lavish wedding or simple greed would make her see it as the immediate solution. Serena thought she sold our nest for a decent but finite sum to finance her vanity. But in reality, she sold the catalyst, the trigger that activated an immediate, massive inheritance for me. Had the house remained untouched, the assets would have eventually passed to Serena too, but in a slower, more controlled, long-term distribution. Her greed made her bypass the small inheritance for the quick fix, thus fulfilling the condition that unlocked the multi-million-dollar fortune for me immediately and irrevocably. She had, quite literally, handed me the keys to a kingdom. The small sum she received for the house was nothing compared to the wealth she'd just activated and forfeited by not waiting. I couldn't help but smile, a cold, calculating smile that I hadn't known I possessed. For the first time in weeks, my tears were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Leonard wasn't just a builder. He was a brilliant strategist. He had used Serena's fatal flaw against itself, ensuring my protection was absolute. I was wealthy, free, and, most importantly, armed with the perfect instrument of justice. The very next morning, I found myself in the polished, leather-scented office of Dr. Caldwell, Leonard's longtime, discreet family attorney. He was an older man, sharp and meticulous, who had always treated me with respect, but now he regarded me with an almost reverent solemnity as I placed the trust document on his vast mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses, his expression initially grave, before slowly breaking into a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Oh, Leonard," he murmured, shaking his head slightly. The man was a genius. He covered every single contingency. Dr. Caldwell confirmed every detail. Leonard, long before his final illness, had crafted this document with surgical precision. The lawyer explained that Leonard's primary goal was not to punish anyone, but to protect me. He knew that the only reason for an immediate, unauthorized sale of the family home would be an act of betrayal driven by urgency or greed. The house, in effect, was an emotional and legal tripwire. Serena's impulsive sale proved the disloyalty and, critically, triggered the contractual justice. The total value of the trust assets, the rental income complex, the bonds, the stocks, is substantial, Vivian. Several million, managed conservatively, generating an excellent residual income, Dr. Caldwell stated. Your daughter, bless her heart, sold the fuse that detonated a secure future for you. The instant the deed transferred, the trust was activated. I finally allowed myself to feel the full, magnificent scope of the Verada de Justica. Serena hadn't just sold the house. She'd provided the necessary condition to ensure my financial freedom, while simultaneously sinking herself into debt for a wedding that suddenly seemed utterly meaningless. I offered a small, private laugh at the sheer irony of the situation. The next steps were purely administrative, but exhilarating. Dr. Caldwell set the process in motion to liquidate the necessary stocks and redirect the rental income into new accounts. The news of my frequent, high-profile meetings with the lawyer, a man known for dealing only with the city's elite, started to ripple outward. And naturally, Serena noticed. Suddenly, the daughter who wouldn't return my calls, who treated me like an inconvenience, began sending me syrupy, solicitous messages. "Hi, Mom. Thinking of you. Are you okay in the new apartment? Do you need help with anything?" The change was palpable. She hadn't heard details, but she smelled the money. She realized her mother, whom she'd assumed was now financially dependent and too emotionally broken to fight back, was suddenly moving in very powerful circles. I kept her at arm's length, replying with clipped, formal responses. I was in no hurry to reveal my hand. I wanted her to stew in her growing paranoia, to feel the exact kind of powerless uncertainty I had felt just weeks prior. I was savoring my new position of power and the slow, sweet approach of vengeance. The time for crying and imploring was over. Now, it was time for the quiet, devastating justice Leonard had planned. Serena wasn't stupid. She may have been shallow and driven by greed, but she was sharp enough to realize that my entire demeanor had shifted. I was no longer the broken, tearful widow who felt obligated to financially support her. I hadn't been back to her calls, but I was clearly busy with something big, something that involved the most expensive, discreet lawyer in town, Dr. Caldwell. The paranoia started setting in. She saw her dream wedding budget shrinking, the small profit from the house quickly absorbed by deposits and vendors, while I was suddenly radiating an untouchable, quiet confidence. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment without warning. She didn't knock. She simply let herself in with the spare key I'd foolishly given her. She was panicked, her eyes wide, demanding to know the source of my sudden wealth. "Where did this money come from, Mom? What are you hiding? Don't tell me Leonard had some secret life insurance policy I didn't know about," she cried accusingly. She looked desperate. The wedding was looming, and the cash from the house was practically gone. I looked at her, calmly peeling an orange, maintaining a facade of absolute serenity. I kept my voice low and steady. "What your father left, Serena, was right under your feet. But your greed wouldn't let you see the true value of anything." That cryptic response infuriated her. She stormed out, but I knew she wouldn't stop there. She was going back to her computer, driven by the frantic need to find a financial loophole, a technicality, something she had missed in Leonard's assets. She spent the next few days tearing through old email accounts, accessing cloud storage, and digging into forgotten digital folders Leonard had shared years ago. She had initially focused only on the obvious: the bank accounts, the joint savings, the official will. She thought the house was the only secret. But then, in an obscure labeled construction files folder I had never bothered to look at, she found it, an early draft of the fideicomiso, the trust document. It wasn't the finalized version, but it contained the core structure and, most importantly, the key clause. She read the condition of activation: the transfer of the deed for the primary residential property built by the grantor. She read the list of transferred assets: rental complex, S&P 500 funds, treasury bonds. The realization must have been a physical blow. The small, quick cash injection she received for selling the house, the very act of betrayal she committed, was the trigger. It wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence. She had traded a multi-million-dollar inheritance, which would eventually have been shared with her, for a few $100,000 now. The shock was immediate and complete. The true cost of her ganancia had just become terrifyingly real. She had shot herself in the foot, blowing up her financial future for a momentary gratification. I felt a chill of satisfaction. It was now time for the final, devastating confrontation. The final confrontation was inevitable, and it arrived 3 days later. Serena didn't come with accusations this time. She came with a plea. She didn't even speak when I opened the door. She just collapsed onto her knees on the welcome mat, completely broken. I saw the raw shame and terror in her eyes, mixed with a desperation that was almost pitiable. She was crying hysterically, not the performative tears of our earlier fight, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a person who has realized the monumental scale of their mistake. "I know, Mom. I know everything," she choked out, her voice ragged. "The trust, the condition. I read the draft. I implore you, please forgive me. I didn't know the trust was conditional on the sale. I just thought it was just the house." She rattled off excuses, citing the pressure of the future mortgage, the rising costs of the wedding, and how much she needed my help. I let her cry for a full minute, watching her on the floor, absorbing every tear, every syllable of fear. I wasn't cold. I was simply finished. I had exhausted my grief on her long ago, and all that was left was the bone-deep weariness of betrayal. Finally, I made her stand up, pulling her to her feet and forcing her to meet my gaze. My expression was perfectly neutral, mirroring the stoic resolve of Leonard in the video. "You didn't know about the trust, Serena, that's true," I stated, my voice quiet but cutting. "But you knew about the betrayal. You knew that house was your father's heart and my final safety. You broke your promise to him and to me, all for a wedding dress and a venue deposit. I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence settle. What you lost wasn't the money, Serena. What you lost was the trust of a man who loved you so much that he tried to protect you even from your own greed. He gave you the ultimate choice, and you chose the most self-serving path. I explained my new situation with calm, devastating clarity. The complex commercial, the substantial, immediate income it provided. I confirmed that the full fortune was now irrevocably mine, legally sealed and untouchable. Then, I offered the final blow of my cold justice. I told her I understood she was in a bind with the wedding and her debts. I offered her a substantial sum, enough to cover the remaining costs and her immediate obligations. But there was a condition. This is not an inheritance, Serena. This is a business loan. It will be secured by your name, with a clear interest rate and a repayment schedule. You will pay it back, and you will never, ever have access to the principal of my trust. This loan is the last financial transaction we will ever conduct that involves my assets. She stared at me, the hope draining from her face as she understood the true nature of the agreement. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a business transaction, a final public accounting of her greed. She was being offered a lifeline, but at the cost of her pride and future expectation. She accepted, humiliated, knowing that the wound of her disloyalty was far deeper than any swift forgiveness could heal. The lesson in cause and consequence was clear, irrevocable, and devastating. With my financial freedom secured and the matter of Serena settled, at least legally, I made my final move. I sold the temporary apartment and purchased a beautiful, modern condo overlooking the ocean in Florida. It was a place Leonard and I had always dreamed of retiring to, a true sanctuary he had planned for me, one Serena would never have the chance to touch. I also decided to establish the Leonard Foundation for Young Builders. This foundation uses a small percentage of the trust's income to provide scholarships and tool grants for young people entering the construction trades, perpetuating Leonard's true legacy of craftsmanship, hard work, and love for building something solid and real. It was a beautiful way to ensure his name was associated with creation and generosity, not the destruction wrought by Serena's greed. As for Serena, I kept my word. The loan amount was paid to her in a single lump sum, enough to save her wedding and prevent her from immediate bankruptcy. Our relationship, however, remained distant and strictly formal. The money didn't buy the erasure of her betrayal. Our interactions were limited to polite, short emails regarding the repayment schedule. In one final pivotal act, I mailed her a copy of Leonard's video. A short, typewritten letter accompanied the pen drive. I explained that the Verada de Justica was never about enriching myself. I had enough, but about liberating myself from her ganancia and disrespect. I wanted her to know the truth, that the house was a final test of loyalty. Its sale proved that for her, a symbol of love was worth less than immediate, self-serving cash. My ending is satisfying, but deeply controversial. I did not forgive her, and I did not forget. I severed the expectation of future dependence. I freed myself completely from the daughter who had prioritized her own wants over my needs and her father's memory. I live happily and peacefully, finally honoring Leonard's intentions. Serena, while financially stable thanks to her husband's own success and her eventual debt repayment, now carries the indelible burden of knowing that her own greed cost her the unconditional love and the massive future inheritance Leonard had ultimately planned for her family line. She is left only with the cold, hard lesson that betrayal always comes back to claim its price from the blood that deals it.